Keyghobadi, who's an artist and independent scholar and a former assistant professor at the State University of New York. She holds an art education doctoral degree from Columbia University, and the title of her paper today is Re-Examining the Modern in Mohammad Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt.
Slideshow. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. The title of my presentation is Re-Examining the Modern in Mohammad Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt. If we define the modern art of 1960s and 70s as innovative and experimental art which broke ties with traditional concepts and materials and sought new forms and ways of seeing and meaning making, then we can describe Mohammad Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt as modern. In 1960s, Ehsaei started creating his Naqqashi Khatt, which means calligraphic painting with its highly abstract style. That was in extreme contrast to traditional and academic painting practices of previous era in Iran. Also, the treatment of calligraphy in his paintings was not similar to other modern artists of the era, such as the Saghakhaneh school artists, since Ehsaei possessed the master calligrapher's sensitivities and knowledge. In 1969, Gerahai Khayyam, which means Khayyam's knots, was the first Naqqashi Khatt that Ehsaei put on display in a group exhibition in Tehran. The work was in such contrast to the other paintings shown in the exhibition that the curator decided to display it separately in the entrance area. The curator's dilemma became the predicament of many of Ehsaei's critics, which continues to this date. Since Ehsaei's work could not be comfortably categorized as painting or calligraphy, Naqqashi Khatt therefore created its own hybrid aesthetic space, which has since moved in and out of mainstream art scene for 4 decades. Ehsaei's work has often been marginalized and not included in the modern artistic movement of its time. Yet there are a number of factors in his paintings which transform and shift this marginality and brings them to front and center as modern artworks. I will discuss 3 of these factors, which are: first, the familiarization of the familiar, construction of the abstract, and experimentation with language. Viktor Shokovsky in 1965, in his essay titled Art as Technique, argues that the purpose of art is to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived and not as they are known. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar, to make forms difficult, to increase the difficulty and length of perception, because the process of perception is an aesthetic end in itself and must be prolonged. Art is a way of experiencing the artfulness of an object. The object is not important. In Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt, it is artfulness that is important. It is how he prolongs the viewer's engagement with his artwork and challenges ordinary modes of comprehension and meaning-making by increasing the difficulty in reading and transforming familiar to unfamiliar. For example, he challenges the first principle of reading and writing in Persian, which is to read from right to left, by rotating letters as well as the writing surface itself, disregarding the beginning or the end points. Woven and knotted letters become illegible and transform from recognizable individual signs and units into new collective and enigmatic entities. Ehsaei shatters the viewer's original frame of reference and creates a space for the viewer to be detached and therefore build up a new aesthetic description of the object. For example, when Ehsaei chooses to use Hafez's poem as his text, The Iranian viewer assumes an initial comprehension of the text and context. Yet, when encountered with Ehsaei's work, the assumption and familiar frame of reference breaks apart through confronting a visual challenge. Ehsaei describes his works as deformations. By deforming familiar scripts like Suds and Naqqashi, he changes the anatomical structure of the letters and invents new forms with fresh meanings. Defamiliarization starts when the text or letter forms confront the viewer and call for alternative ways of deciphering the visual and verbal reading experience. The viewer cannot find the beginning or end, nor the linguistic rhythm and structure of the poem. The letter forms do not convey or represent their poetic meanings, but embody a new set of semiotic connotations. In the visual context, the familiarization begins with Ehsaei, for example, uses the traditional format of architectural epigraph, katibeh, in mosques. As elements of a social space, architectural epigraphs of a mosque are displayed publicly and are contained and fixed within their designated location and orientation. The content of epigraph in a mosque are verses of Quran that are legible and meant to be read, as well as to play a practical role in their context, which are religious prayers and meditations. By the virtue of their sacred content and location, they possess spiritual qualities, and by the means of their aesthetic form, they manifest artistic imagination and ingenuity. Where epigraphs provide familiar sights of aesthetic experience and perception to their recipients, Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt, although closely related to epigraphs, do the exact opposite. Ehsaei opens up a space meant for the unfamiliar and increases the length of perception for his viewers. He replaces the sacred Arabic Quranic verse with secular non-sequential Persian poetic verse, changes its format and location from the architectural tile work of a mosque to an oil painting on canvas in a gallery. Construction of the abstract. Mohammad Ehsaei frequently describes his Naqqashi Khatt as architecture of letters and words, and easily negotiates with and navigates through spiritual, secular, poetic, symbolic, conventional, and contemporary spaces and narratives through his meticulously calculated abstract constructs. The strongest example of this visual negotiation and navigation through the architecture of letters and in the visual and verbal realm of poetic narrative resides in Ehsaei's black and white paintings. The use of black letters on white background is not only Ehsaei's homage to traditional calligraphy, but black ink on white paper and calligraphic practice of siyah mash. But also it relates to his modern approach towards simplicity and his preference for black and white over color as a reaction to the multiplicity of color in conventional Iranian architecture and craft that surrounded him as a child. Ehsaei explains, I ask myself, did my childhood experience with array of colors and lack of black and white affect me so much that I was drawn to these two colors? On the other hand, calligraphy and many years of working with black ink on white paper played an important role in my preference. It is only natural for me to like black and white, which are simple, direct, intimate, and humble colors. In addition to their simplicity and directness, black and white represent binaries of saturation and void, dark and light, presence and absence, closed and open, which also exists in Ehsaei's first black and white work titled Baran in Gandomzar, which means rain in the wheat field. That's on the far left. That he painted in 1973. Another effect that Ehsaei's childhood aesthetic experiences and memories may have had on his artistic choices and visual language, besides his choice of colors, manifests itself in his fascination with calligraphy, architectural epigraph, katibeh format. Magnificent examples of such epigraphs can be found in religious and historic monuments such as the Atiq, Haydari, and Sultani mosques in the city of Qazvin, where Ehsaei was born and spent his childhood. He recalls examining and copying various scripts and following their forms and compositions in mosques for hours. Kufic script, especially in the plated style, has been the dominant form of Islamic epigraphy. In plated or interlaced Kufic, the stems or bodies of single, 2 or 3 successive letters are interlaced. Although one of Ehsaei's earliest paintings is called Gerahai Khayyam, which is Khayyam's knots, the knotting and locking of the letters and words intensified in his work much later. His first experiments with abstraction of letters demonstrate a sense of freedom from technicalities of writing and his interest in formalism and abstraction. However, as Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt progressed, gradually the stems and curves of the letters started to embrace, then merge, and finally weld. The new forms were eternally stuck and knotted together, as in his painting Barandar Garumzar. Ehsaei weaves the letters and words together in a way that creates a unified visual tapestry of language, with its weft and warp now and again attracting and distracting each other. Letters pile up or rest upon each other and compose a weightless structure made out of curvatures and linear forms. Alefs not only stand beside each other in a radif, which means row, but also form a radif, that the constantly repeated rhyme word in Persian, it also means that. They may also become visual embodiment of zikr, which is meditation. When I asked about the knots in his work, Ehsaei replied, I wonder why do I like these knots? I don't know, maybe because they are somehow ambiguous. They somehow make you think. Whoever looks at them wants to undo them. Usually, psychologically, when people confront a knot, a desire to unknot it is aroused in them. Maybe unconsciously, this aspect was attractive to me, making knots on me. However, later, when reflecting again on the use of knots and locks in his work, Ehsaei also suggested, maybe these knots are my screams that are muted. I'm eating my words. These are my silent shouts, like when something is stuck in your throat. These words get stuck and locked together, and I scream with sods, which is the most powerful and suitable script for depicting this. Undoing the knots and deconstructing or liberating the form and content in order to understand the context of Ehsaei's works add to its interpretive qualities. The positive and negative spaces are carefully designed and planned to create moments of strain and liberation. Without the negative space, the positive space does not materialize and reveals its existence. The repetition and lack of focal point that is omnipresent in most of Ehsaei's works can be read as his deliberate attempt to draw the attention of the viewer to the importance of all elements in the composition, as well as multiple meanings and reaching aesthetic or spiritual truth. Ehsaei gradually engineers his spaces and forms and morphs them into an entirely new and abstract entity. This is exactly what he does with language, specifically poetry, which is the main component of his visual explorations. Experimentation with language. A closer look at the development of formation of Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt reveals its continuous relationship with language and poetry. Ehsaei describes his paintings as poetry-like texts that are taken from familiar language and emphasizes the separation of his narrative from information or illustration. He explains, I'm a calligrapher, and in Iranian tradition, calligraphers use poetry of famous poets, which are familiar to the public. But in my Naqqashi Khatt, poetry is just an excuse, and although I have this background and I use poetry, I may only use a line or few words. The poem is not the main element for me. The main aspect are aesthetics and form. The materials of Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt are language and poetry, which he instinctively selects, and their form and words are letters, which he masterfully crafts. He uses the signs in a common language such as letter forms and transforms them to expressive objects of art with their own uncommon syntax. Ehsaei reminds the viewer that looking at a work of art that is based on mere writing adds a new dimension to the process of experiencing it. His Naqqashi Khatt has a strong poetic and emotional quality, which he brings to the surface of his canvas by his verbal and visual selections and references that shift based on the viewer's linguistic and cultural background. Looking at and experiencing the word as an abstract image in Ehsaei's Naqqashi Khatt is a near impossible task for those who can read Persian, since the viewer must merely focus on the formal aspects of the artwork and keep a distance from the literal meaning that the letters and words evoke. The viewer has to keep her or his experiences out of the familiar space of interpretation and response, whereas a viewer with no knowledge of Persian language and poetry would depend merely on her or his aesthetic responses and will freely find a way into the space of Ehsaei's artwork. In conclusion, what brings Ehsaei's paintings to the center of the modern and contemporary art space is his fresh look at the form and context and exploring and rethinking the function of calligraphy. By obscuring the pragmatic role of traditional calligraphy, Mohammad Ehsaei reveals its aesthetic nature and playfully changes familiar to unfamiliar and constructs sophisticated, abstract, language-based visual marvels. Thank you.